When we're searching for missing people, it takes 528 people 4 hours to search 1 square mile, and that's if they're spaced 10 feet apart.
What they were looking for was much smaller than a person, but if police could find something, it could help forensics solve a vicious crime. Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. It is a crime that started with water and ended with water, but no amount of water could wash this bloody crime away. Exhibit A, a swab of blood. Can the lab coax a DNA sample out of a tiny bloodstain and solve a vicious murder? On a peaceful Sunday morning, a father and his 2 sons out fishing come across a strange catch. It is a bundle of women's clothes. Off in the distance, the father sees what appears to be a mannequin. But as he gets closer, he realizes it is a dead female. He heads for shore to call police. Paul Smith, who now works undercover, was the lead investigator.
It did look like a mannequin from the rope, so I did not go down right away to not disturb any footprints or any evidence that would may have been found there.
The victim's face has been battered beyond recognition. An autopsy concludes that the deceased is a female in her early 20s. Her face has been mutilated with something razor sharp and pounded with something blunt. And she has scrapes on her chest area, suggesting that someone held her and attacked her from behind.
At the post-mortem, the pathologist made it clear that the cause of death was the carotid artery being severed as a result of blunt trauma. A possible weapon was identified as a roofer's hammer or a hatchet, and that's what we were looking for as a weapon.
One curiosity: the victim's body is almost bloodless. The story of the unknown victim hits the local media and spreads throughout the small community. While puzzling over the circumstances of the woman's death, the investigator checks missing persons.
Obviously, we didn't have a name. All we had was his body in the river, and that's all we had. Nothing much came of that. We searched missing person files for quite some time, trying to identify this person.
Since no ID is found on the victim or among her clothes, the dead woman is fingerprinted, and her prints are entered for comparison purposes into a database. The database turns up a match with a Brandy Wright, who had once been booked for impaired driving. She is 24 and a local girl. When the detective sees her photograph, he realizes he knows her. She had been his waitress a couple of months ago. They had gotten into a long, intense rap. She had told him she was trying to break a string of bad relationships and finally get her life together. And she had applied to art school and been accepted. He had seen her around town once after that.
She enjoyed the lifestyle of having a good time. She frequented the bar scene quite a bit, and she liked Harley-Davidson motorcycles.
Who would have wanted to kill her? Police get the first lead when someone reports having seen Brandy's car parked outside a local bar since Saturday. Inside the car, there are no clues as to the violence that was inflicted on her. The bartender remembers seeing Brandy in the bar the previous Saturday night. She was playing pool. But the bartender got busy around 8 and never saw what time Brandy left, or if she left with anyone. What had happened to Brandy Wright between the time she left the bar and Sunday morning when her body was found? And why was her body almost bloodless? In a small farming community, the big news is that on Sunday, a young woman named Brandy Wright had been fished out of the local river. A bartender told police she saw Brandy around 8 that Saturday night. But what happened in between? Then police get a break.
I received a call from a person known to me who was actually a local lawyer saying a person wished to speak with the police regarding this case.
His name is Donnie, and he agrees to talk to police if they will put him in the witness protection program. Donnie tells police he had been at the bar Saturday night and ran into this guy, Gar Nemi. Nemi went nuts on him about some money Donnie supposedly owed a mutual friend. Donnie said later he saw Nemi talking to some girl named Brandy. Nemi was showing her his gang membership card and his tattoo as proof he'd done hard time. Brandy said she had a thing for bikers. Around 10, he saw Nemi and Brandy leave together. When the detective asks what kind of bike Nemi rides, Donnie tells him Nemi doesn't ride a bike. He's got a beat-up station wagon. Police learn that Nemi never did hard time and has never been in a gang. He's a biker wannabe. And he's been living out of his car in a gravel pit since his common-law wife tossed him out months ago.
33-year-old male found dead a few days ago. Someone amongst them is our killer.
Police put him under surveillance and release a story to the media that they would like to speak to him about the case. Nemi is observed heading for the police station, then turning down a side road that leads to a barn.
He was observed walking from his car directly to a barn, a standard cattle barn on the property, with one hand swinging and the other hand not swinging.
But finding anything that Nimi might have hidden in the barn would be like finding the proverbial needle in a haystack. To narrow it down, an investigator times how far Nimi could have gone in the 30-odd seconds he spent there. About this time, Nimi arrives at the police station. Police question him about Brandy Wright and whether she had left the bar with him. But Nimi clams up and refuses to answer questions without a lawyer. Meanwhile, the investigator has brought in a team to search the barn.
You know there may be something there, but there may not be. But you have to go with that positive attitude that says, if there's something here, I'm not going to be the weak link that misses it. I'm going to find it. I looked down and I could see what appeared to me to be a hammer or hatchet type piece of, like a tool of some kind, but it appeared really clean and I knew it hadn't been there very long.
With its two ends, one razor sharp and the other blunt, it could be the murder weapon. It is sent to the lab to be tested.
When the roofing hammer was tested for blood, the outside of both the metal portion and the wooden handle were clean. There was no blood found on either of those portions.
But after examining the hammer for hundreds of hours, a tireless biotechnician finally finds something.
When the caulking at the base of the metal portion of the head of the hammer was very carefully examined under a stereo microscope, there were traces of blood found in that area.
Those traces of blood are tested for DNA and compared to the victim's DNA.
Well, when we tested that blood, we found that we had a complete profile at 5 loci, and that matched the profile from the deceased in this particular case. It was a very powerful profile.
What's frustrating is that although Nimi had been seen going into the barn, according to the rules of evidence, the detective cannot testify that Nimi, and only Nimi, put it there. That's when the detective turns to another forensic science. A vaginal swab taken during Brandy's autopsy reveals semen, suggesting she was raped. The problem is, whose semen is it? Without a comparison sample, DNA is like a single glass slipper. But when Nimi is arrested, he refuses to give investigators a blood sample, as is his legal right. But the detective is determined to find a way around this. The opportunity presents itself in a strange way. Nimi suffers a heart attack in jail and is rushed to the hospital.
I just got a search warrant executed on the hospital and obtained a sample of his blood, sent it to the Center for Forensic Science.
Nimi's DNA is consistent with the DNA of the semen on the vaginal swab. It proves that Nimi had sex with the victim that Saturday night. But when Nimi's health recovers and he's brought back to jail, he comes up with a story that he hopes will neutralize the DNA evidence. Nimi tells a friend to pass on to police what he claims happened that Saturday night. Nimi says that he and Brandy left the bar to pick up some beer. As they were driving back to her car, which was still at the bar, his car broke down. As he was fixing it, a group of bikers suddenly showed up and started punching him. They took Brandy and locked her in the trunk of their car. Nimi said he tried to get away. He drove to the gravel pit where he used to live, but they followed him and pulled him out of his car. By this time, Brandy was dead. Then they made him have sex with her corpse, which is why his semen was on the vaginal swab. Nemi swears that the bikers dumped Brandy's corpse in the river. He also confides that the biker types also made him have sex with them. Though the detective finds this preposterous, he suspects every alibi has a kernel of truth. But what is it? And will he be able to find it and finally crack this case? Gar Nemi, the prime suspect in Brandy Wright's murder, has come up with a story about bikers killing the victim at the gravel pit where he used to live. Though the detective finds the story preposterous, he knows that every alibi has some element of truth.
The problem right off the bat was we don't have a crime scene. His car was determined not to be the scene, and the river was not the scene of the actual murder.
That's when the detective calls in a search team to examine the gravel pit.
The actual grid search itself of this gravel pit strictly involved man hours, person hours, people hours to do the job. And that is hands and knees, going through the gravel, sifting through the gravel, looking for anything of any evidentiary value. I mean, I know when we're searching for missing people, it takes 528 people 4 hours to search 1 square mile. And that's if they're spaced 10 feet apart.
As a result of a second sweep from north to south, searchers find 3 identical buttons. They correspond to the only remaining button on Brandy's blouse. They also find her name pendant. It matches the one in the police photograph.
So now we had the weapon, we had the accused, and we had the crime scene where it was actually committed.
But investigators need one more thing to clinch the case. They have to prove that Nemi is the one who transported Brandy's dead body from the gravel pit to the river. The problem is, when police first seized Nemi's car to examine it, they found the back area was dry while the front seats were clean and soaking wet. The car had been run through a car wash with both front windows down.
There was a sample of blood swabbed from the windshield of the accused's car. This was a very small spot. We worked with that sample for at least 4 months because we were trying successively different DNA tests to see whether we would be successful.
Finally, it yields results.
We were able to get very faint profiles in 2 of the DNA tests. Those 2 tests allowed us to form the conclusion that this profile matched the profile of the deceased.
Based on all of this is what investigators speculate happened on that Saturday night.
Mr. Nemi and the deceased had no knowledge of each other's existence prior to them meeting that night. He saw her and approached her in the bar and gave her a feed of lines, trying to build himself up to someone he wasn't. He was a wannabe biker. She trusted him almost immediately because of what he said, which none of it was true. That was the only reason she went with him. He saw that she was liking that, or it was working out good for him, so he kept it going, and that's what got them together. She believed in him, hook, line, and sinker.
Nemi told Brandy he knew of a biker's field party, and they left the bar together to go there. But instead, Nemi took her back to the gravel pit.
She was a very attractive woman. He thought he was in paradise when he ended up with her in the car, because I don't think he would ever have a girlfriend of such stature in his car.
Then she must have rejected him. But Nemi was now too close to what he wanted to let her go. So at some point, he reached for his roofing hammer.
He knows what he wants, and he's gonna get it. She just got in the way by arguing with him. She didn't submit to him. She fought him because she is a fighter. So basically, she's going hysterical when this is happening. So he hits her to quiet her, and then he rapes her.
Then he let her bleed out like an animal, which is why her body was bloodless. Eventually, the blood would seep into the gravel and the rain would wash it away. Then he put her body into the passenger seat, bundled up her clothes, and dumped everything into the Big Head River, hoping the current would carry it away. Nemi is convicted of the first-degree murder of Brandy Wright and sentenced to life in prison. 5 years later, Nemi dies in jail of a bad heart. Brandy Wright continues to be remembered. In the year before her death, she had been trying to swim upstream. One could only hope she would have been the one that got away. The tranquility of a small town is shattered by a brutal murder. There are no leads, no witnesses. Police are stumped. Can shell casings and blood spatters on a cardboard box lead police to a cold-blooded killer? Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. Nova Scotia, a place where the landscape is beautiful and the locals are friendly. Located along the Trans-Canada Highway, Elmwood has a population of less than 2,000. Most people in this town know each other, and everybody knows the Morrisons. They own a gas station right on the highway. Even with summer traffic, it's a quiet place. So quiet that in the summer of 1994, the Morrisons planned to close the gas station, but they decide to keep it open to give their teenage son, Kyle, a summer job. It's August 7th. Kyle's father is away on business. His mother leaves him to mind the station. When a car pulls up, Kyle has no worries. Business as usual, except it doesn't turn out that way. Half an hour later, police respond to a frantic call from the next customer who stops at the Morrisons gas station. They find Kyle Morrison dead, apparently from a gunshot wound to the head. They also find the cash register empty. RCMP Corporal Chris Paley is in charge of the investigation.
It was obvious to initial investigators that we were dealing with a robbery and homicide. An incident like this is not common at all for that area, and everyone was shocked and dismayed that something like this could have taken place.
I'm okay. I just want to speak to you.
Paley knows this is going to be a tough investigation. For one thing, there are no witnesses.
We knew there was potential that we really did have our backs up against the wall, that it could be some person or persons just traveling through the community.
While investigators begin looking for witnesses, the ident team examines the physical evidence at the scene. Paley calls on bloodstain analyst Sergeant Craig Tomash.
The body's gone, so it's challenging to me to go in there and to determine which bloodstains are of significance.
Tomash begins to examine the types, sizes, and locations of the bloodstains in order to identify their point of origin and their trajectory.
At that scene, I found passive drops. I found pooling of blood where he lay, and I also found high-velocity impact patterns.
He hopes these will give him a picture of the sequence of events. In addition to Kyle Morrison's bloodstains, police find 2 shell casings left behind by the killer. These casings, along with the 2 fired bullets retrieved from Kyle's body during autopsy, are given to firearms examiner Daryl Harvey. Police hope that Harvey can tell them what type of firearm was discharged.
The class characteristics from the fired bullets were compared to the FBI General Rifling Characteristics database. As far as identification goes, the fired bullets were .32 caliber.
Using a comparison microscope, Harvey concludes that the bullets and the cartridge cases were fired by the same weapon.
The individual tool marks, which are passed between a barrel and a bullet during firing, are unique to that firearm, as unique as a fingerprint.
From the crime scene evidence, investigators now know that Kyle was murdered by one person shooting a .32 caliber firearm, but they're a long way from identifying who that person is. News of Kyle's death spreads through the community of Elmwood. No one can believe that a crime like this has occurred in their small town. Their hearts go out to the Morrisons as they begin to deal with their son's murder. Determined to find the killer, the investigators' first step is to look into Kyle's background. Nothing in his life gives police a clue. Kyle had no hardcore enemies in school or in the community. He didn't drink, he didn't do drugs. He was a good kid. Police are convinced they're looking at a random crime. They'll have to cast a wide net to see who was in the area when the murder occurred. They ask police in neighboring detachments to keep them informed of any other serious crimes that occur. They set up a same-day, same-time road check a week after the murder took place. They're hoping to find someone who was driving by and might have seen something. None of the drivers they talk to remembers anything, until they stop a man who passes the station the same time each week on his way back from baseball practice. He remembers seeing a sporty blue car parked by the pumps and a young native guy standing next to it. In retrospect, he says, he found it strange the way the man was just standing at the pumps waiting. It's not much of a lead, but it's more than police have had until now. The community is terrorized. People are keeping their children inside and their doors locked until the killer is caught. 2 weeks have gone by since the murder. The Morrisons are distraught. Hundreds of hours of police work and thousands of tips have turned up nothing concrete about the murder of their son. On August 21st, Paley gets his first response from a neighboring police detachment. A major crime has just occurred in a nearby jurisdiction. There's been another murder. Two murders in 3 weeks. Paley drives to a small First Nations reserve to check out the second murder. A young Native man, 23 years old, has been shot. Paley is particularly interested in this crime because the only credible lead he has in the investigation of Kyle Morrison's murder has pointed to a Native man. But when Paley gets to the scene, his hopes of making a connection fade. The weapon they find at the scene is a .22 caliber, whereas Kyle was shot with a .32. According to the reserve constable, there has been trouble in the community with a gang of youths. Witnesses say the gang leader, a guy named David McDonald, had been arguing with the victim right before the shooting. This doesn't appear to be a random crime like at the gas station, but an argument between friends that erupted into violence. It doesn't look like there's any connection between this case and Kyle's murder at the gas station, so Paley decides to head home. Just as he's leaving, he spots a sporty blue car parked near the murder scene. Could the description of a Native man and a blue car seen outside the gas station just be coincidence? When Paley discovers from the local police that the car is owned by murder suspect David McDonald, he decides not to leave until he can dig a bit deeper. According to a reserve constable, McDonald incited his followers in his self-styled gang into a life of crime, drugs, and violence, inspired by gangster rap and movies that glorify the lives of young men in the ghettos of American cities. The two other gang members are Greg, a local boy, and Richard, another teenager from parts unknown. Then, investigators get what appears to be their first real break. The autopsy of the victim on the reserve reveals that he wasn't shot with the .22 caliber gun found at the scene after all. He was shot with a .32, the same caliber bullet that killed Kyle at the gas station. Could this be the link police are looking for? The bullet is sent to Darrell Harvey. Using a comparison microscope, he compares this bullet to the one that killed Kyle.
The class rifling characteristics were in agreement, and the individual characteristics were in sufficient agreement to allow me to conclude that the bullet had probably been fired from the same firearm that fired the two bullets in the murder of the gas station attendant.
David McDonald, the gang leader, is arrested for the murder on the reserve, but he absolutely refuses to talk, except to deny any involvement in Kyle Morrison's murder.
We knew that we were on the right track here, and we could now zoom in on the people that we knew were, in all likelihood, responsible for our murder.
Police focus on the other gang members, hoping to get the story from them. They've been investigating the two teenagers. One of them, Richard, has disappeared. Investigators don't even know his last name. But they managed to track down the other gang member, Greg. They bring him in for questioning. He denies involvement in any crime at first. Under intense questioning, Greg admits to being part of David's gang, but he denies any knowledge of Kyle Morrison's murder. They keep pushing. He finally admits he knows more than he's been telling. Greg's story is that he came to the gas station with David McDonald. Greg says he stayed outside as lookout. David went in with his gun, robbed the gas station, and shot Kyle Morrison. So not only is David McDonald the prime suspect in the murder on the reserve, but now it looks like he may have killed Kyle too. To Paley, there's something about Greg's story that doesn't ring true. Desperate to prove he's telling the truth, Greg surprises police with some new information. He takes them to a wooded area not far from the reserve. There, he digs up a small metal box. Inside it, wrapped in a cloth, a gun. A .32 caliber Zeska Zabrovka. They send the weapon to Daryl Harvey for testing.
The Zeska Zabrovka was one of the manufacturers that I had identified as a probable make and type to the investigators some 2 weeks prior. It was of the same caliber. The fired bullets were microscopically compared, and I concluded that the 2 fired bullets from the gas station attendant's murder had been fired by that pistol, and the bullet from the reserve murder had been fired from that pistol.
Exhibit A, the murder weapon. It proves beyond a doubt that the murder victim on the reserve and Kyle Morrison were killed by the same gun. Police are convinced that David McDonald is their killer, but he still denies committing either murder. Paley decides to question Greg again, hoping that this time he'll tell them what really happened at the gas station. Under pressure, he comes up with yet another version of events. Now he claims that they drove to the Morrison gas station in a van they'd stolen a few days earlier, not in the sporty blue car police found on the reserve. He also says there were actually 3 of them: David McDonald, himself, and the elusive Richard police have been looking for. In a final surprise to investigators, Greg changes his description of the shooting. He claims that it was Richard, not David, who killed Kyle Morrison. He admits that Richard Sacobason is his cousin. He was trying to keep him out of trouble. Police believe that one of these men is their killer, but which one? Before police can decide whether David McDonald or Richard Sacobason is the killer, they've got to locate Richard and see what he has to say for himself.
Once we finally had Richard Sacobason identified, we went into trying to determine his whereabouts. And we determined that Richard was in the United States, staying with his father on the reserve there.
Investigators collect him from the U.S. authorities and set out on a 5-hour drive back to Elmwood. After a short time in the car, Richard starts to talk.
Once I started, I'd go ahead. I didn't want to do it, you know? It's like...
Right there, in the back of the cruiser, he admits to killing Kyle Morrison. Richard says that on the morning of Kyle's murder, he was sleeping at his mother's place. David McDonald woke him up. Is he ready for a 187? That's American ghetto slang for murder. They'd already stolen a van earlier that week. They drove off looking for some easy money.
Devastation. The life that you lead's only money and schemes. Hustling, fake cash, only live pipe dreams. Try to live like your heart, but you know where that leads. Devastation, devastation. You all about diamonds and pearls, fancy cars. Try to play the life of a movie star.
A gas station with only one attendant and very little activity was the perfect target. When they got there, David and Richard went into the gas station. Richard was holding the gun. David demanded the cash. Richard says he was terrified as he aimed the gun at Kyle, but he had to prove to David that he could go through with the .187. His hand was shaking and sweating so much, he claims that Kyle lunged at him and the gun just went off. Twice. Although police believe Richard's confession, they don't believe the story of accidental discharge. The fact that he shot Kyle twice tells them that this is probably a self-serving attempt to get away with murder. But they need proof to show that Richard is lying. They turn to science to find it. Paley asked Darrell Harvey to test the murder weapon and see if it could have gone off accidentally. Harvey analyzes the gun to find out how much pressure it takes to pull the trigger.
The shooter would have to exert 17 pounds force against the face of the trigger, pulling the hammer to the rear, cocking the hammer, and then initiating discharge. The pistol was also subjected to a mechanical shock discharge test to determine whether or not the pistol was prone to discharge by being jarred or bumped. From a scientific point of view, the trigger had to be pulled to make the pistol discharge.
The analysis of the murder weapon goes a long way in giving Paley the proof he needs. To make his case airtight, Paley turns to bloodstain analyst Tomash. The bloodstain patterns at the scene and on the victim also dispute Richard's accidental firing excuse.
There was flow patterns, and what flow patterns are is when the blood exits a wound and is allowed to flow. There's only one way that the blood stains on his face, and the stains on the cardboard box next to his body could have been created. And that's when he was shot the second time as he lay on the ground. And that bullet passed through that blood trail, causing the blood to take flight and to spatter.
The angle and height of the blood spatter proves that they did not originate from the first shot. The trajectory of the spatters tells Tomash that the second bullet had to have hit Kyle's face when he was already in a prone position on the floor. This was an execution-style shooting. These three young men set out to commit a .187 that morning, a cold-blooded murder, just like in their favorite gangland movie, and that's exactly what they did.
The family and the investigators were just couldn't believe that this is what this was really all about. It was a sad day.
Kyle Morrison had the misfortune of having a part in the real movie these men decided to play out that day. The killers go to trial. Greg pleads guilty to armed robbery. He gets the maximum sentence in young offender court. David McDonald pleads guilty to manslaughter in both the murder on the reserve and at the gas station. He's sentenced to 15 years. Richard Sockabasin is a young offender at the time of Kyle Morrison's murder. The Crown wins the right to try him as an adult. He's convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The gangs that inhabit the impoverished ghettos of American cities live inside a culture of violence. It's a culture that is depicted graphically in the movies and music that emerge from that reality. No one in the small town of Elmwood, Nova Scotia ever imagined that this reality could touch theirs. But it did. It reached out its tentacles and helped turn three disaffected young men into killers, bringing tragedy to the Morrison family and to the community around them. A spree killer is targeting innocent victims. Is he insane or a cold-blooded murderer? The difference? A mental hospital versus life in prison. Can forensic psychiatry penetrate the mind of a killer? enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. Rage. It can smolder for years, repressed and hidden deep inside the soul. Then all of a sudden, without warning, it can erupt, shattering human lives. It is often said that prostitution is the world's oldest profession. What is often left unsaid is that prostitution can be a very dangerous profession. Women and men who sell their bodies can be objects of loathing, aggression, and rage. The torrential showers, thunder, and lightning on Victoria Day, May 20th, 1996, didn't hamper the festivities in downtown Toronto. It was a great night to celebrate, and a perfect night to mask gunshots.
It was the proverbial dark and stormy night. It was torrential downpour with rather spectacular lightning and thunderstorm. And shortly after 12, we get a phone call, and I was advised they found, tucked in a corner of the parking lot, a woman in her mid to late 20s lying spread eagle, face up, with an obvious gunshot wound.
A witness tells the police she heard a loud bang. At first, she thought it was the fireworks, but then from her window, she caught a glimpse of a truck speeding away through the lightning and saw a body lying in the parking lot. Another call comes in for the detective. A second body has been discovered on the other side of the city.
The victim was a 19-year-old male, Caucasian, who was a slight build, dressed in female clothing, was wearing a wig, and had obviously been shot.
In his wig, investigators find a bullet. The next morning at the morgue, the detective discovers that a third body was found around the corner from the second victim. This third victim is a man in the process of undergoing a sex change. He has been shot in the face at close range and has been dead for hours. Police identify the first victim as a 25-year-old woman named Rose Douglas. The second is Darcy Cooper, a 19-year-old drag queen. And the third is a 31-year-old transsexual known as Gina Thompson. Police soon discover that all three have minor criminal records for prostitution. And all three were cocaine and crack users. 3 grisly murders committed on the same night at opposite ends of the city. Who is behind this killing rampage, and why? The 3 autopsies show that each victim died of a massive skull fracture caused by a single shot to the head. The bullets are extracted and sent to the ballistics lab.
I took all 3 of them, mounted one on the one stage as a comparison microscope, and compared them all to one another. And I reached the conclusion that one gun and one gun only had been involved.
The bullets, which are the only evidence left at the crime scenes, are very distinctive. Exhibit A, a black Talon bullet, before and after. These bullets are illegal in Canada because of the extensive damage they inflict.
Here's the reason it's called black Talon. It's because you got all these very pointy, very sharp talons, if you will, that rip and tear and damage the flesh just unbelievably.
The 3 autopsies reveal a distinctive marking on the skin of the victims.
Stippling, which is a more correct term, the colloquial term being tattooing. And it is indeed tattooing because the skin is pierced by something, in this case, grains of powder rather than a needle. And at close range, generally speaking, less than 2 feet, you'll get that type of phenomenon occurring depending on the type of powder you have in your cartridge.
Police speculate that the spree killer who drove across the city and killed 3 prostitutes the same night was like a man on a mission. They suspect that the murderer is someone equally drawn and repulsed by prostitutes who killed in a sudden eruption of rage. Who is the killer? And can police find him before he kills again? Police are looking for a spree killer who gunned down 3 prostitutes in a night of rage. They don't have a single lead, not a single suspect. The lead investigator goes hunting for clues in the prostitution community. A candlelight vigil is being held where the last 2 victims were found. The prostitutes are eager to talk to the detective. They are living in fear, and they want the killer caught. They tell the detective that Rose was a dropout, a runaway who had been introduced to drugs and prostitution by a boyfriend at an early age. She had tried many times to kick her habit, but in vain. Darcy was new in town. He was an aspiring female impersonator and singer who worked the streets the night of his death because his government check was delayed. Gina was a loner who lived quietly. A woman trapped inside a man's body. Gina spent her spare time writing poetry and short stories. With no clue as to the identity of the killer, police go back to the witness from the first murder who had caught a glimpse of a truck speeding away from the crime scene. The witness knows nothing about vehicles, so she is hypnotized and a police artist draws a freehand picture of the truck. What is unique is that it has a distinctive light on its cab. Police release the composite drawing to the newspapers. Close to 1,000 phone calls come in. All lead absolutely nowhere. 9 days after the murders, police have hit a dead end. Then they get their first break. A call comes in from a lawyer who has a client eager to talk about the triple murders, but only on condition of complete immunity from any criminal prosecution. His name is Mickey. He vividly recalls the events of May 20th, Victoria Day. Mickey had been sound asleep when he heard someone banging madly at the door.
Mickey, open the door.
It was his best friend, Marcelo Palma.
It took you so long. Open the damn thing. Get out my way. What are you doing?
Marcelo rushed in a complete frenzy.
He was wearing dark clothing. He'd taken off his boots by taking out a Rambo knife, cutting off the bootlaces, which was a very strange way of acting.
Marcello asked Mickey for dry clothes, and he insisted that Mickey keep his bag safe for a while. Inside the bag, Mickey discovered a revolver. The following day, Mickey met Marcello at a donut shop and asked what happened. Marcello took a napkin and wrote out, "I've done something bad." "How bad?" Mickey asked. Marcello underlined "bad" 3 times, and then he burned the napkin. Marcello told Mickey that he had picked up a prostitute the night before, gotten angry, and popped her one. He then killed 2 other prostitutes, shooting the second victim twice because the first bullet had missed. Police want to question Marcello Palma, but first they have to find him. They put his house and business under surveillance, but Marcello Palma is nowhere to be found. So police obtain warrants to search both premises. In the parking lot at the rear of Palma's air conditioning business, they find a truck. The distinctive light on the top of its cab matches the description the witness gave of the vehicle she saw leaving the crime scene. Next, police pay a visit to Marcello Palma's house. Mrs. Palma paints a picture of her husband as a successful businessman and a family man. They have been married for 5 years and have a young son. But when they question her about her husband's whereabouts, Mrs. Palma admits she and her husband had recently separated after she found out that he had a mistress. Then police make a discovery.
We had recovered several firearms, and among those firearms was a Stern Ruger .357 Magnum short-barreled, 2-inch barrel revolver.
The revolver is sent to Finn Nielsen, the ballistics expert.
When I looked through the bore, it was gleaming. It was clean. There was no evidence of any residues in it. But then I put it on the stereo microscope and had another look, and I saw that the front of the barrel, something had been pushed in there that was rotating and had removed part of the rifling. I suspected that I probably had the right gun, and somebody was trying to make it tough for me to imagine.
Meanwhile, the lab has examined Palma's truck. Technicians have found small bloodstains on the seatbelt. A DNA profile of the sample matches that of the female victim, Rose Douglas. Police now issue a nationwide alert for the arrest of Marcello Palma. But Marcello Palma seems to have vanished without a trace. Marcello Palma is wanted by the police for the point-blank murder of 3 prostitutes. A revolver has been found at his estranged wife's house. Ballistics has shown someone has tampered with the gun. So Finn Nielsen test fires the gun. He compares these bullets to the bullets recovered from the victims. They match. Palma's gun is the murder weapon that killed Rose Douglas, Darcy Cooper, and Gina Thompson. The nationwide search for Marcello Palma is in overdrive. Through his credit card, Palma is traced to Montreal. Then his trail goes cold. Police finally learn that Marcello Palma is in Halifax, Nova Scotia. When he is apprehended, he calmly states his name,
Marcello Palma,
and gives up without any resistance. But this case is far from over. Through his lawyer, Marcelo Palma claims that at the time of the killings, he was suffering from a psychotic episode and cannot be held criminally responsible for the 3 deaths. If defense prevails, Palma will be sent to a mental hospital for treatment rather than be jailed for life.
In terms of our ability to evaluate whether somebody is or isn't telling the truth about their own symptomatology, of course, we don't have a blood test or a brain scan that's going to give us a definitive answer. We can never say unequivocally, there's no question whatsoever, this person is or isn't trying to fake symptoms of mental illness.
Phil Klassen digs deep into Marcelo Palma's past. He discovers that underneath a seemingly normal facade, Palma was living a secret life. A life of anger and rage. Klassen learns that Marcelo Palma had a voracious sexual appetite. As his wife became less interested in sex, Palma took a mistress to combat a sense of failure. Palma's records also reveal that he had been seeing a psychiatrist for years. He had admitted to having sex with prostitutes, both women and men. He called them scum and said he wanted to kill them to get rid of that scum. And Palma told his psychiatrist that he had started amassing guns. This is the unfolding of events presented in the Superior Court of Justice. According to the prosecution, on May 20th, 1996, Marcelo Palma got ready for a night of killing. Dark clothing and heavy combat boots. From among all his guns, Palma selected his favorite, a Sturm Ruger, easy to conceal. He also chose black talon bullets, which explode and mushroom in the flesh. That night, Palma was a man on a mission. The defense counters that when Palma ventured out into the storm that night, he was already distraught. He was out of touch with himself due to arguments he had earlier with his mistress and his wife. Palma first picked up Rose Douglas, a prostitute unknown to him. He drove her to the rear of an isolated parking lot. His original plan was to get her to perform oral sex on him, but he changed his mind. He became enraged. The defense contends that from this point on, Palma was having a psychotic episode. He felt as if he was outside his own body and was incapable of knowing that his acts were wrong. But the prosecution argues that Palma knowingly put his gun to Rose's head and fired, deliberately. Next, Palma drove a half hour across the city, picked up Darcy, and took him to a poorly lit fire escape. He shot him twice. The second time point blank, because the first bullet had missed. Minutes later, Palma encountered Gina. Making sure there were no eyewitnesses, Palma lured Gina into a dark alley. Palma shot her execution style. The prosecution adds that the next day, when he recounted the killings to his friend, Palma demonstrated an awareness that what he had done was wrong. In his decision, the judge ruled that Marcelo Palma's entire course of conduct that night had a single purpose: intentional destruction of people he regarded as lesser beings. The court found Marcelo Palma guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Over 300 people attended the candlelight vigil in the memory of the 3 victims: Rose Douglas, Darcy Cooper, Gina Thompson. In spite of the problems that tied them to the streets, Rose was a woman fighting to kick her drug habit and find some happiness. Darcy was a young man who dreamed of being a performer. And Gina was a man on a unique journey. A troubled young man skips parole and vanishes after a fight with his ex-wife. Police believe he's a fugitive. His sister fears the worst. What did the ex-wife see at the bottom of the stairs? And what does the punk next door really know? Will a sister's desperate search find the answers? Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. Sibling rivalry and sibling love are flip sides of the same coin. What if your brother has been a troublemaker all his life? Can you just forget about him when he disappears? Not if you believe you are your brother's keeper. Jason Petrie and his older sister Tammy don't always get along, but she loves him and wishes she'd been a better sister. Maybe his life wouldn't be such a mess. It's 1992 in Mississauga, Ontario, and Jason's just been released from jail. He'd served a 6-month sentence for break-and-enter and uttering threats against Cindy McLeod, his estranged wife. Jason has shown up at Cindy's house and he's causing trouble again. He threatens to take his son away from Cindy by force. He has even bought 2 airline tickets for a flight to British Columbia. Police are called. They break up the fight and send Jason on his way. He's not happy, but he leaves. He doesn't need any more trouble with the law. While Jason was in jail, Cindy moved on with her life. She has a new boyfriend, Craig. After the fight at Cindy's, Jason doesn't return to the halfway house he's living in. He doesn't show up at his sister's either. He'd been there earlier in the day and left some of his things behind. He wouldn't go far without cigarettes or money. Tammy's worried about her brother. Inspector Len Favreau is not yet involved in the case, but he would come to know Jason Petrie's story very well.
He never did return and was subsequently reported missing by his mother and his sister. The police investigated the missing person and determined because he was actually missing from a halfway house that he was unlawfully at large.
Has Jason skipped out on his parole and gone west?
Now, whether he was reported missing or unlawfully at large really didn't matter at that stage because police would be actively looking for him.
Tammy's suspicious. She confronts Cindy and demands to know what she knows about his disappearance. Cindy says she doesn't have a clue where Jason is. He probably just took off like he said he would. But Tammy is beginning to think otherwise.
She believed that he had somehow met foul play at the hands of somebody else.
2 weeks pass and Tammy is actively searching for her brother. She doesn't buy the disappearing act. She's afraid Jason is in real trouble, but police have no evidence to support her suspicions.
There were incidents when the missing person was sighted out west and in other areas of Ontario, so those had to be investigated and followed up. And every time one of those sightings came up, it led credence to the fact that in fact, he had chosen to disappear. And no evidence came up to suggest that there was any foul play.
A month after Jason's disappearance, a man walking in the deep woods miles from the city finds a key attached to a wallet. The ID is Jason Petrie's. The police are brought in. Investigators scour the area and dig around the spot where the wallet was found in hopes of turning up more clues. Anything to help their search for Jason. But the police come up empty.
Well, of course, this was brought to the attention of the Homicide Bureau at the time, but there was also suggestions that this was part of the scheme for him to make himself disappear, to bury his wallet and his ID, go off, assume another identity in another province, and get his life sorted out.
Tammy, convinced the police aren't doing enough, conducts her own search in the woods. But it turns up nothing. Police return Jason's wallet to Tammy. She adds it to the few mementos of her brother's life. Months stretch into years. Still, Tammy maintains the flame of Jason's memory. She's hoping against hope that her young brother is still alive. But in her heart, she fears the worst. Tammy won't give up. She doggedly campaigns police and the public to keep the quest for Jason alive. In 1995, 3 years after her brother's disappearance, Tammy Petrie appears on a television program devoted to finding missing persons. She hopes that among a nation of viewers, someone might come forward with information about Jason. Watching TV that night is a teenager who brags to a girlfriend that he knows all about Jason. He isn't just missing. Jason is dead, and he wasted him. Police receive a tip from an informant. She tells police that a guy she knows, Daryl Walchuk, has bragged about killing Jason Petrie. Daryl's story is that he killed Jason 3 years ago. It turns out that Daryl is a neighbor of Jason's ex-wife, Cindy. He had been present at the last fight between Cindy and Jason.
On the basis of this, the informant agreed to assist us in our investigation, and the homicide investigation was commenced.
Police asked the informant to get Daryl to show her where he had buried Jason's body. A surveillance team tracks their movements to a spot in the woods close to where the key and the wallet were found 3 years earlier. Daryl points to where he remembers burying the body. Police call in Dr. Jerry Melby, a forensic anthropologist, to examine the site. He explains how a victim's burial site might be found.
We looked for soft spots in the ground, of course, any place that suggests that there has been disturbance in the soil. Of course, animals disturb the soil, and this leads us astray a lot. I was asked to do a controlled excavation of the burial because, of course, police were quite certain that they had the spot. We looked at tons of spots around. Of course, a number of years had passed, and everything had grown over quite a bit.
The search has come up empty again. Police are frustrated. Daryl has been in trouble with the law before, but it's all small-time stuff. Now he's bragging he killed Jason Petrie, but no body has been found. While police keep Daryl under surveillance, Favreau returns to the exact spot where Jason's wallet was found 3 years earlier.
It was a gut instinct that forced us to return to that area and dig again, exactly where the wallet was located.
This time, the search leads to a very different outcome. Investigators find an address book belonging to Jason. Then Favreau himself makes a gruesome discovery.
I was able to reach in to the cavity and I could feel bone. And we knew at that stage that we had found the victim. There was some elation, and we were also struck by the horror of the situation, of course. And so it's a very confusing moment.
The body was buried head down, partially wrapped around the root of a tree. Normally, after 3 years underground, a body would be almost completely decomposed. But Jason's body is largely intact. Melby finds that the killer has dumped lime into the hole, probably with the intent of speeding up decomposition.
It's the type of lime that is commercially sold. It is designed not to accelerate decomposition, it's designed to hide smell. By dumping in all of this lime, it created an anaerobic environment. That is, decomposition could not continue at a rapid rate because no air or bacteria could move in there and multiply. And so, in fact, they had preserved the body rather than aided decomposition.
An autopsy is performed. Jason was definitely murdered. His legs are bound with rope, but pathologists cannot determine the exact cause of death. In his examination of the body, Melby does find something interesting. One of Jason's legs has been badly broken.
Of course, people do fracture their legs, but almost immediately there is some healing involved, and new bone cells are moving in, and this was a fresh break. So clearly it occurred either after death or at the time of death.
Police tell Tammy the sad news that her brother's remains have finally been found. It's little consolation that for 3 years, she has been right about Jason's disappearance. Police now bring in Daryl Walchuk for questioning. They aren't convinced that he is the murderer. They don't think he has it in him to be a killer.
He was a troubled individual who liked to consider himself to be a big man about town and would big himself up by letting people believe that he was involved in all kinds of criminal activities that he was not involved in.
When he's confronted with the reality of life behind bars, Daryl quickly crumbles. He says he didn't really kill Jason. He says Cindy's boyfriend, Craig Nickerson, killed Jason. His story gives police a new lead. They interview Cindy. At first, Cindy sticks to the tale she told police 3 years ago. Jason left town. The end. But when confronted with the news that Jason's body has been found, she hastily changes her story. She says Jason and Nickerson had been friends, but when her marriage broke up, Jason started threatening her and she turned to Nickerson for comfort and protection. He never hid his anger about the way Jason treated her. She says Nickerson left her house moments after her last fight with Jason. Nickerson showed up at her door the next day and forced her to come with him. He said they were going north to his parents' cottage. He needed her help to look after a few things. He told her she'd never have to worry about Jason again. He had taken care of everything. Cindy says her trip ended in the basement of the Nickersons' family cottage. What she saw from the top of the stairs horrified her. What she did next made her a criminal. Police have a body and 2 people who claim Craig Nickerson killed Jason Petrie. But Nickerson's accusers fear and hate him. They could be trying to frame him, and police have no independent witnesses to corroborate their versions of events. Police press further. Cindy then reveals a sordid tale of violence, intimidation, and murder. Both Cindy and her neighbor Daryl admit their roles in covering up Jason's murder. Cindy says Nickerson disposed of the body, then forced her to clean up the mess in the basement. Nickerson then bullied Daryl into helping him bury the body. Both Cindy and Daryl say they feared violence from Nickerson if they went to police. Craig Nickerson is arrested, but the evidence against him is circumstantial. It will be tough to prove a 3-year-old murder with no witnesses. Police will have to corroborate Cindy's story with science. Constable Mike Illis is a bloodstain analyst. He is dispatched to search the Nickerson cottage for evidence of Jason Petrie's blood. But can he recover evidence of blood spilled 3 years earlier?
We had a witness that indicated that she saw the victim tied to that post and bleeding into the floor. We found a number of areas that look like blood or look reddish. Glucomalachite green is a blood enhancement chemical, and it works on dry blood, and it reacts with the iron and hemoglobin in the blood. When the chemical is sprayed on, then it reacts, it turns vibrant green. You're able to see bloodstain patterns. And we found a pool pattern on the cement floor by the post. The pool pattern is consistent with the blood source being in that location for a period of time. If someone was injured and the blood was flowing out of them onto the floor.
He is not able to collect a large enough DNA sample to match Jason Petrie's, but his findings still strengthen the case against Nickerson. Police still need more evidence and a better understanding of the sequence of events. Cindy tells police that after the fight in her front yard, Nickerson followed Jason from her house and lured him into the car. He said he drove Jason to a secluded park. Knocked him senseless, then smashed his leg so he couldn't escape. This would account for Dr. Melby's discovery of the leg bone broken around the time of death. But how can police prove in court that Jason was under Nickerson's forcible control before he was murdered?
Well, it's extremely important in a case of homicide, of murder, in establishing that the victim was forcibly confined. And when you have a case of murder in which you also have an element of forcible confinement, you elevate the murder from a second-degree murder to a first-degree murder.
Cindy's story is that Nickerson borrowed a friend's car, forced Jason into the trunk, and drove north to the cottage. Nickerson told Cindy he could hear Jason trying to escape, so he slammed on the brakes to throw his victim around in the trunk. It was sadistic punishment for a man who was trying to save his own life.
The information led us to believe that there would be some evidence on that trunk that would go to establish or support the statement that was made by the ex-wife.
Investigators must find the car that Nickerson used to kidnap Jason. But the car no longer belongs to Nickerson's friend. Can police find it now, 3 years later? Using Ministry of Transportation records, they locate the car and execute a search warrant to seize the vehicle.
We had the trunk lid and the latch, and we were able to establish that it had been damaged and had been repaired.
Exhibit A, the damaged lock inside a car's trunk. It's evidence police hope will prove Jason was trying to force his way out. J.P. Menard is a toolmark examiner at the Center of Forensic Sciences. He studies the scratches and dents around the interior trunk lock to determine whether they could have been made by a tire iron.
It's not just simply a matter of determining whether this tool made this mark, but also testing whether this tool could be used in a variety of scenarios, with the trunk open, with the trunk closed, with somebody from the outside, with somebody from the inside, with somebody from the inside who's not up to perfect physical capabilities or possibly injured at the time. These are issues which had to be explored before any determinations could be made. Now, to do this, you can observe the damage patterns. You can look for structures within the trunk that would allow for better leverage or use of the tool. There was areas of damage typical of that, of a impression and possible contact with the tool, with varying angles of force around the lock mechanism or latching mechanism itself. The markings found inside the trunk were those typical of somebody attempting from the inside of the trunk trying to break to the outside.
Police finally believe they have the evidence they need to convict Nickerson of the sadistic murder of Jason Petrie. Craig Nickerson is charged with first-degree murder. He avoids trial by pleading guilty to a lesser charge of second-degree murder. He's sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 14 years. Cindy McLeod is convicted of obstruction of justice and is sentenced to 18 months. Darrell Walchuk is not charged, as police and the Crown agree that he was acting under duress at Nickerson's hands. After 3 agonizing years of fear and hope, and after hundreds of hours of diligent police work, Tammy Petrie was finally able to bury the ashes of the younger brother she loved. The bad memories would fade, the good ones would live in her heart forever. The stories on Exhibit A are based on true cases. The forensic scientists and investigators are the actual individuals who worked on the cases. The names of the guilty are real.